Hello my fellow gamers and video game nurses. In this video I'll be going over what I consider to be some concepts that took me way too long to understand when I started filling bars as a job in World of Warcraft. With that being said, let's not waste any more time and get right into it. Now I know this sounds stupid, but if we were to count how many times we died in our Mythic Plus career, I think it would add up to a shocking number, at least for me. Not dying in a dungeon, if you think about it, is pretty damn hard to do on a consistent basis. I've personally died a lot of times when I was pushing in my keys due to tunnel visioning on my party frames or simply underestimating damage. While in lower keys, a healer dying mid-pull is not that punishing. When you start aiming for a higher level content, a healer that dies is basically game over. Some trash or bosses in our current expansion Shadowlands requires your healer to babysit some people for a specific amount of time or else they die. I've also noticed some healers dying due to not using their defensives properly. I cannot count how many times I died on my Holy Paladin with Bubble Up due to me tunnel visioning on someone else not using their defensive. Especially as a healer, it is a must know how hard things hit, and this will tie into our next point. Shadowlands is a very cooldown oriented expansion. Because of this, some bosses slash affixes slash trash will require some healers to use cooldowns so that their team doesn't die. It is the way it is. Now let's get this straight. I've seen so many healers hold onto their cooldowns so that they can wait for the perfect time. The perfect time for cooldowns is very hard to find unless you whiff them and use them when you shouldn't so you can learn you wasted it. I play Mythic Plus as a tank as well, and I sometimes see a lot of healers just hold on to their major cooldowns forever, get behind in healing, and leaving people die a slow death. If you have absolutely no idea when to use your cooldowns, just use at least one when you see your team die or when a boss does some party-wide damage. A good example of this is the third boss of Sanguine Depths, where the higher you will go, you will need a cooldown answer for her massive part damage, or else everyone will just die. And I speak this from personal experience. For every party damage, you should have some sort of answer, and cooldowns are pretty much always an answer. Do not fall into the trap of I can heal this without cooldowns. This is not a good mentality to have. Cooldowns are there to be used, not to be held. Some cooldowns will actually allow you to forget about healing for a while, which will also allow you to deal some damage and save a massive amount of mana. This can help time the key, as I cannot keep count how many keys I've been overtimed by 5 seconds, beating myself that if I did just a tiny bit more damage, I would have timed it. We've recently had to swap our mentality about healers completely. Shadowlands has taught us that with healer damage, M plus becomes easier in some cases. Now, if you're a healer that does absolutely zero damage throughout the whole dungeon and just waits for people to get damaged so they can immediately heal them, change that playstyle right now. I know it kind of sucks, but it is what it is. Every healer has a way to do damage. Some healers have an easier time doing this, but all of the healers have to do damage no matter what. Doing damage will actually kill bosses and trash packs much faster, thus allowing you to use less healing spells and cooldowns, and thus allowing you to not go auto mana every second pack. The ideal scenario is doing damage all the time, but not all healers can do this. While not really something bad, some of them will actually train you to know when you need to push your healing buttons and when to push your damage buttons. And in modern WoW, it's actually a very important skill that healers need to master. A general rule of thumb is to be at least in your tank's damage range. So for example, if your tank did 4k DPS, aim to do at least 3.5k for a start. Remember that damage taken in Mythic Plus at the end of the day is pretty scripted, so you can actually predict when you need to stop doing damage and when you need to heal. Another very important thing, but rarely talked about, is general healer awareness. This is a skill set more seen in advanced healing, and it's very broad. It will require a whole separate video for it, but I will try to make it short for now. What I mean with this is being aware of people's defensive cooldowns. For example, if your tank has used all their defensives and the pack is taking too much time to die, it's time to push your healing abilities on your tank teammate. Or one of your DPS players has used their defensive and they're unlucky to be targeted again by a tyrannical boss's mechanic. Then it's time to use one of your external cooldowns to keep them alive, and so on. This takes a massive amount of knowledge, sadly, and it's very hard to train if you don't study a tiny bit the other class's defensive spells. A small shortcut is to use some sort of cooldown tracker. What I use is OmniCD, where I can track who used what spell and how close it is to being up. And it also has a very nice section of what defensives classes have, and you can study this sort of stuff. Keep in mind, the higher you go, the more pressure it is on you to be aware of these things. DPS dying to a mechanic with their defensive up is not really your fault, but knowing your DPS has no defensive up and letting them die is your fault. This is again another subject which is pretty complex to the player needing some pretty big knowledge of dungeons, but I will give some simple examples and from there. The higher you go, the more important DPS is. It can literally break or make a key. This means that the stuff that will stop your DPS players from doing damage is recommended that the healer does it. A good example is doing the Mist of side maze while your team takes care of the trash bag, stopping patrols from coming if your spec allows it with paralysis, mass entanglement, hex, etc., using your stuns so that your DPS doesn't lose uptime, doing dungeon covering mechanics yourself if possible, or being a backup kick if you play shaman, and so on. Basically, do your team's dirty laundry. These small things add up so much and it can have a snowball effect on a dungeon's outcome. Usually you learn them as you play with better players or by watching other people do Mythic Plus. Some healers have no idea that there are some hidden rules written, and by doing them you can really prove, in my opinion, you're not only a complete healer but also a complete player. I'm aware these are some massive generalizations, but in the future I could make more videos that go more in depth into these, but for now these should suffice if you're new to healing or maybe want to take it to the next level and have no idea where to start. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button. For more content like this, which is in the pipeline, consider hitting that subscribe button. And if I missed maybe something obvious, make sure to also note it below in the comments. With that being said, take care of my fellow nurses and gamers.